How often do we stop and think about the food we eat and its impact on climate? On a lazy weekend morning, I decide to make pancakes with the kids, but not just any pancakes. These are cooked with a special flour that comes from a new kind of wheat grain called Kernza, and researchers are betting it'll be a game changer for our environment.
Ooh, good. Yeah, good flip.
Can Kernza spark a food revolution that brings new life to an agricultural system that's been harming our environment for decades and help fight climate change along the way? We'll take a look in today's episode and taste a few samples. I'm Amy Barrio. This is State of Change from Clean Wisconsin. It's a bright, warm morning in East Troy, Wisconsin, where I meet Nicole Tautges, an agroecologist with the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute. We walk along a research field packed with tall green plants called Kernza.
We are looking at 6 acres of Kernza. This is a variety Minnesota Clearwater. So I planted this in fall of 2020. We harvested grain last year in August of 21, and now we will harvest again in 2022.
Now, to me, this field that we're standing in front of looks a lot like really tall grass. It's green. You can kind of see the grains at the top, the edible part of the plant. But there's a lot happening underground too, right, that we don't see that could be really, really good for the climate.
Yes, so Kernza roots typically grow past 10 feet after a year. It's giant root mass. Kernza is doing photosynthesis. It's fixing carbon out of the atmosphere. It's turning it into root biomass, and then that's staying in the soil, which is what we want to happen. Perennials and grasslands, we've found, are the best way to sequester carbon and also get a product off that we can use.
So the plants that we're looking at in this field are perennials, and that means that they're going to grow back, basically, after harvest. That feels like a big departure from what we're used to, the annual agriculture, the planting of the corn and the soybeans on the same fields year after year.
Yeah, annual crops are so dominant on our landscape, and they didn't used to be. There used to be a ton of alfalfa because we had livestock integrated on farms. There used to be a lot of hay and pasture, again, because we had livestock on every farm. That stopped in the 70s and 80s as the industry pushed consolidation and specialization. And there went all the pastures, now in all the perennial phases. So why are we interested in perennial agriculture? Drive around the Midwest, we love our lakes. You know, there's algae blooms everywhere all summer. And that's caused from phosphorus runoff from corn and soybean fields. Simple. Plain and simple. That's really what we need to start preventing and figuring out. And so the dream with Kernza is to, reduce or eliminate a lot of the pollution that comes from agriculture. People are thinking with a perennial, we're creating this huge root biomass, and all of those roots are going to live year-round and hold the soil in place and suck up any nutrients that haven't been used. So we can even start to think maybe about like strategic placement of these perennial crops around vulnerable water bodies or other locations where we really want to protect them. Because this, with the large root systems, with the high nutrient need of the above ground biomass, Kernza has the ability to take up a lot of nutrients, which means that they're not being leaking out of the system to pollute other things.
When you look at all this Kernza growing that you planted, this new crop that's so different, are you excited?
I get excited because, from the farmer perspective, it's also really nice to not have to go out and plant every spring. I didn't do anything this spring. It just simply grew, and now I have a grain crop. I didn't have to till for establishment. I didn't have to set my planter. I didn't have to order seed. So that was awesome from a labor standpoint. I'm using less fuel and emitting less, fossil fuels that way. And also it was just easier and saved me a lot of time. So that's exciting. But I think what really made me exciting was to see all the cover that's out here and to see it earlier in the spring. I have a picture of Kernza right next to a rye cover crop. And cover crops are planted to, do soil conservation and those sorts of things. And the Kernza looks like a green lawn, and the rye is just starting to regrow. And so it's so nice to have that green in the spring. And then after harvest last year, I harvested my grain, and 2 weeks later I have green regrowth. And so I just look out and I marvel at sort of the ability of a plant to start regrowing, and now it's making another product. Some farmers are going on and using that forage in the fall for grazing or for hay. And I think it's really just exciting to see the versatility and the ability of this to look natural.
From everything you've been saying, it sounds like the environmental benefits of Kernza are pretty well established for our climate, for waterways, for our soil. But people have got to eat it, right? For people to want to grow it. Is anybody really going to buy and eat a grain that they've never even heard of?
Ultimately, it really comes down to the quality of the product and how good it tastes. I was at a conference with a lot of end users and bakers, and they were saying, and they're the experts, if we put out a product that has all the labels and benefits in the world and it's reasonably priced, people still aren't going to buy it if it doesn't taste good. So that's really where the buck stops. And I think the good news for Kernza, and I started off as a huge skeptic, how different can a grain really taste? I think it has this extra flavor. It's kind of nuttier. People describe it all different ways. Some people taste more cinnamon, more nutty flavor. It has more protein. It just kind of brings something extra to the party that wheat doesn't. And so I think we need to figure out on the end use side how to play that up in a way that makes it delicious, and that's what's going to drive people to buy it too.
And that brings us back to those pancakes.
Try a pinch of that one. This one? All right. That's the smallest pinch. Really?
I like the crisp part.
It's cinnamon. Like French toast a little bit. It's good though.
Cinnamon.
It's kind of like surprisingly good.
Tastes like nutmeg.
No more pinching off.
Look.
No more pinching off.
Kernza easily passes our taste test, but if you're thinking it sounds too good to be true, you might be right. I had to order the Kernza flour for the pancakes from a processor in Minnesota. You can't get it in Wisconsin yet. So what really needs to happen to put Kernza on plates across our state? In Madison, I sit down with UW professor Valentin Picasso, who's been working to develop Kernza for years.
It's the first time in history that we have a perennial grain crop. That's why it's so exciting. We need to do something that's transformative. We need to find a way to improve the environmental performance of our agriculture in a transformative way. And just tweaking little aspects of the system is not going to be enough. The idea came, what we need is to do a radical transformation. We need to give new roots to our crops. So in the case of Kernza, Kernza is intermediate wheatgrass. It's a grass that has been going on forever. And so the new thing about Kernza is that plant breeders have improved the production of seed of that grass and therefore the production of grain of that grass. So cycle after cycle, they selected the plants that had higher yield and were able to achieve a grass plant that produces a lot of grain. Well, I wouldn't say a lot of grain, but produces enough grain to be feasible as a crop.
So Kernza's been dubbed the climate-friendly grain because it can pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Does the climate crisis that we're feeling more and more add a bigger sense of urgency to this work around Kernza?
Absolutely, and that's why we really need to expand the research. When this started, it was maybe 20 years ago at the Land Institute in Kansas, and the idea was it's going to take at least 50 years before we can get a feasible crop that can go commercial, but we cannot wait that long. We really don't have time to wait until we have the perfect system. That's why we've gone with this. It's an experimental crop. There's a lot of questions we still have. It doesn't yield like other crops. There's questions about how to manage the crop, how to harvest the crop. There's a lot of information we don't have. Really, the motivation of trying to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere, it's a major driver of this. If you think about it, if you have a crop that can be doing photosynthesis year-round, and that carbon that's fixed from the atmosphere can go into the soil, it's great because you're not releasing carbon, but at the same time you're putting carbon back into the soil, into the ecosystem. So we are positive, we're optimistic. but we need to invest more on developing the research in order for this to be adopted widely.
What's the biggest barrier right now to Kernza becoming as common as corn or wheat?
Well, there's a lot of barriers. One component is, the breeding is not ready yet. I mean, the plants produce enough yield to be commercially feasible, but we really need to increase the yield. And so plant breeders are actively working on, year after year, increasing the yield. That's one thing. The other component is the agronomic management. There's very little knowledge about when we have to plant it, how we have to plant it, how we have to fertilize it, how do we have to harvest it, what other crops can be good companions for this, how to do our rotation with a perennial grain in the rotation. So there's a lot of agronomic questions that we need to answer before farmers can take the risk to grow a new crop in large areas. The other part has to do with the policies. There's a lot of policies that promote the current system that we have, that provide farmers subsidies and payments for keeping the crops that are today in place. And so we also need to address that component. We also need to figure out incentives for farmers to take the risk and adopt perennial crops or other crops that are more environmentally friendly than the ones we have now.
I know this crop has been talked about for a while, but now we've got, a Kernza Fest happening in Minnesota every summer. There are Kernza Field Day events in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Kansas. Is there growing excitement right now around this crop?
Yes, that's definitely true. We see a lot more farmers interested in growing Kernza. We see a lot more people asking about Kernza. Where can I buy Kernza flour? Where can I buy Kernza bread? Where can I buy Kernza pasta? So there has been a growth in interest from people and also from researchers. Initially, there was, is this going to work? Maybe this is a long-term thing. And now there's more and more researchers engaged globally, not just here in the U.S., but in many other parts of the world. So I think that's going to be important to really be able to get to where we need to get with Kernza. And there's also growing interest to develop other perennial grain crops. There's perennial rice that it's being developed in Asia. There's perennial sorghum. There's perennial sunflower. So they're a little behind in the development compared to Kernza, but they are certainly coming in the near future. And I think that's going to be a really big transformation of agriculture in the not so long future.
Thank you.
It's food for thought as I sit down with Clean Wisconsin Water Program Director Scott Laeser for a bowl of Climate Smart cereal, a limited edition cereal made by Cascadian Farms that features, you guessed it, Kernza.
The flavor feels a little bit like richer or nuttier. I don't know. The long and short of it is I like it.
I mean, it's kind of like, bran flakes a little bit, but less branny. Mm-hmm. Sweeter. Do you feel like you're helping the climate right now?
A little bit. Kernza is a perennial, so it is out there all the time. It is protecting the soil. It is holding nutrients. It is acting as a living cover 12 months of the year. And a lot of our agricultural systems are not built like that. Kernza is a really promising potential game changer in the world of how we grow our crops and how we grow our food.
Perennial agriculture seems to have a long way to go before it can be replacing corn, replacing wheat in a number of our food products. Or is that even achievable from your perspective?
Absolutely, it's achievable. It really depends on what we want and what we value. And what we've been doing for a really long time is asking farmers and even telling them to grow us cheap food, consequences be damned. And people are realizing that this drive for cheap food for decades had a whole host of consequences that we just didn't recognize and didn't appreciate. There's a lot to be gained from how farmers grow that food and the message that we send to them in the 21st century. It should be grow us good quality food that protects our air and water resources, and we will work with you to help you do that because we need to change the way we farm in order to accomplish those goals. We also need policy change. We also need investments in our farm community and in farming systems that encourage and reward innovation and change. This is an effort that we are all going to have to commit to sort of as a society, as a community, urban and rural alike, because the benefits of success and the consequences of failure will be shared by all of us.
So I think when people think about fighting climate change, they think about solar panels and electric cars and buses and things like that. But how important is it that we change the way we farm, that we change agriculture, we change what we feed animals, this whole food system out there?
So we've dug ourselves a pretty big hole. We've got a lot of work to do. Solar panels, electric cars, renewable energy are all really important. But we cannot meet our climate goals. We cannot secure the future of a more stable, less volatile, and safer climate without changing the way we manage our land and grow our food. And that means doing a better job managing our forest, and in some cases planting more of it to pull carbon out of the air. And that means changing the way we grow our food, from our grains and our cereals to our meats and our fruits and our vegetables and everything in between.
You're a farmer. Do you believe that you're going to see that happen?
I do. I believe it's already happening, and that's an important thing to note. We don't have to start from square one today, but we have to rapidly scale up and accelerate and feel the urgency of deploying these new agricultural practices and changing our food systems.
Back at the Kernza research field in southern Wisconsin, another growing season is almost finished. And with each season that passes, researchers are another step closer to the change that's becoming more urgent every year. So how do you have, patience, right? Because this is an exciting crop. It can do a lot for the way we currently grow our food, the way we are currently polluting our water systems. But you have to kind of wait on it to be ready. Is it hard to get up every day and wait on crops to be ready to kind of get in there and make a difference?
It is hard, but you know how much work it is, and so in a way you want to have more time because you just see all the things that you have to figure out to get there, and it's a little overwhelming. I think we're all impatient in Kernza. We're all impatient for it to be adopted on larger scales in the market. We're all impatient for more people to know it and know what it tastes like and be eating it. And the impatience drives like me and the other southern Wisconsin Kernza grower, Willie Hughes of Hughes Farm. We are very keen to start working on a cleaning setup for this so that we can start processing grain here in southern Wisconsin without having to ship it to the large cleaning facilities in western Minnesota. And so I think what I'm most looking forward to in the short term is having a bag of grain. It's kind of like your strawberries or vegetables that you grow in your garden. Like, I grew this, let's eat it together.
For more information about climate-smart agriculture and land-based climate solutions, log on to our website at cleanwisconsin.org. For Clean Wisconsin, this is Amy Barrio. You've been listening to State of Change.